working through their lives and through their hearts to see that their need for you, Lord. And so as the kids downstairs are learning about the covenant with Abraham, Lord, we have a different covenant through belief in Christ, and that ultimately with Abraham was pointing to Christ as well, regardless, Lord. So I pray that as we continue to worship today, as we read through your word and see what that would have for us, Lord, that you would move us and move us in a way that we not just sit still, but we can't help but share what you are doing in our hearts and in our lives, and that other people that you would utilize us to bring other people to you as well. So I just thank you that you are a God that holds true to your promises, that we can trust your word. And as we get to have the word preached to us, Lord, I pray that we would have soft hearts and spirits to be listening to how you would have us be impacted today. Pray for this in Jesus' name. Amen.
So the passage that Pastor Fred's going to be taking us through today is from Judges chapter 2, verses 11 through 15. Perfect. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them and bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. They abandoned the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to plunderers who plundered them, and he sold them into the hand of their surrounding enemies so that they could no longer withstand their enemies. Whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them for harm, as the Lord had warned and as the Lord had sworn to them, and they were in terrible distress. And that's the end of it.
It's good to be back with you all today. That's a dark passage, right? That's the book of Judges, though. It's honestly one of the worst books in the Bible. It's in the way that it's so dark, right? Like that's the motif. This happens 12 cycles. This happens 12 different times in the book of Judges, and even beyond that, where there's this terrible cycle where they're worshiping God, and then they fall away, and God gives them and delivers them into a hand of one of the neighboring countries that doesn't believe in God, and they plunder them, take their goods, and own them and control them for a number of years. And then they cry out, and God sends them a judge. And we're actually going to be over in chapter 13 in the book of Judges. The 12th and final judge is probably the most famous. His name is Samson, and he is the last judge. 3,000 years ago, God sent an angel to talk to a little family in a little town that couldn't have a child. And he said, "You're going to have a child." He's done that a few other times in the scripture, right? He did this to them, and he said, "You're going to have a special child, and it's going to be a Nazarite. It's going to have a special vow and a special mission." And so this idea that as a child this child that they were going to have was going to be a judge that was going to free them from the captivity of the neighboring Philistines. The Philistines were a seafaring people, and they followed the god Dagon, who was a half fish, half human hybrid demigod that was deified eventually. And here we have them owning and controlling the Israelites for years, putting them under their thumb, and it wasn't a pleasant time. And so we're going to have a bit of a history lesson today. If history is your thing, you might enjoy this. If not, hang with me. And as we go through it is a dark and horrible time in history and in this story. Now, the chapter before, chapter 13, when his parents were told by the angel that they were going to have this child for God to be a judge, they asked God two very important questions. The angel, they were saying, what is his mission going to be? And what is his manner of life? That was important to them because they wanted to train up their child in the way he should go so that they would obey God's mission for his life. And they wanted to bring him up the right way. And again, he had this Nazirite vow, which was very unique. He couldn't have anything of fruit of the vine. He couldn't have grape juice, no wine, no hard drinks, no raisins even. He couldn't touch anything dead, and he couldn't cut his hair. And that was part of his vow to be a unique individual to God. So, Samson grew up, and we're going to start in chapter 14, verse 1. Judges chapter 14, verse 1. It says, Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Then he came up and told his father and mother, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me to wife. But his father and mother said to him, Is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all of our people that you must go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes. All right, so we're starting off with Samson's dating life. He went to a town, not of Israel. He went to Timnah. Now, there's a bit of a lesson there, right? Like, honestly, when people, it shows us that, wherever we're going can have a bad influence on us, right? He went to intermingle in this bad town as opposed to his mission from God. What was his mission from God? His mission was to free the people. So his country right now was conquered already for a number of years by the Philistines. And so instead of, training up the people and rounding up an army like Gideon had done a few chapters beforehand or some of the other guys, he instead decided, let's put saving Israel on pause. Let's put my mission from God on pause, and I want a girl. And so he went over and, saw a woman that he really liked and told his parents, get her for me. There's a couple different things with this, right? A couple different lessons we can learn. Number one, Samson is the type of guy who let the lust of his eyes control him and who he was. And he let that desire actually take him off course, take him off mission. And so we all have to ask ourselves in our lives, instead of looking at Samson and saying, Samson, you messed up. Because honestly, what we do is just the same all the time. We let our desires, though they may not be as bad as Samson's, they may not be as extreme as some people, we are all human beings that easily allow our whims and desires to take us off God's mission in our life. Now, he talked to his parents disrespectfully. He didn't ask for their wisdom. He didn't listen to their wisdom. And there's a couple things about that, right? As a young person, it's so easy for us to think we know the best. I remember when I graduated high school at the ripe age of 17, I disregarded a lot of my parents' wisdom for college and how I should do college and which college I should go to. I disregarded almost everybody's opinion because at that moment, as a young man, I thought I was the smartest person in every room I was in. And it's interesting because we all struggle with pride. Samson not only struggled with the lust of the eyes, but he struggled with pride. He didn't listen to his parents' wisdom of many years. Just like Adam and Eve in the garden took the fruit off the tree because they saw it was good to look at. It was good for them. They listened to the serpent. Just like that, Samson did the exact same thing. He did what his heart wanted. He let his lust determine his direction. And so his parents object, right? They had that wisdom. He didn't want anything to do with that. They were like, why don't you marry an Israelite? Maybe someone who follows our God, right? The one that you're supposed to be serving right now. But he doesn't care. He was proud and lustful. It's interesting, though. what happens right after this? Let's continue reading. Verse 4, it says, his father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. Then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah, and behold, a young lion came toward him, roaring. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hands, he tore the lion in pieces, as one tears a young goat. But he did not tell his father or mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and she was right in Samson's eyes. So verse 4 has a very interesting note. It says his father and mother didn't know that it was from the Lord, that the Lord was actually using Samson's lust and pride for his own glory. Right? So this is part of actually God's holiness. So when we use the churchy word holy, it means that God is different than us. That in every category, in every characteristic, God is different, and how he uses people is so unique. Many of us are so easily deterred off of our mission, off of our path, our manner of life. We go to work and someone's mad, or something goes wrong at work, and it messes us up and gets us off course. When something happens in this life, nothing takes God off course. God knows it all and plans it all. It's not like when Adam and Eve fell in the garden that was news to God and that he had to adjust all of his plans. Or when Satan decided, you know what, I'm not going to be an angel that serves you. I'm going to, do my own thing and fall. God knew all that was going to happen, and he had that as part of his original plan. The fact that Jesus died on the cross was always plan A from before the very foundation of the world. Nothing surprises God. Samson's mistakes here do not surprise God, and neither do ours. I know something like for me in my life, and no matter what mistakes I've ever committed in this life, and none that we commit in this life are a shock to him. And it's something where, when Jesus died on the cross for our sins, something that he forgives us of all of our past, present, and future problems in this life. And for Samson, while he's messing up, and while I'm reading this passage, I look at this, and it says that his father and mother go down to this other city with him. And at first, as I'm reading this passage, I'm like, come on, parents, don't go with him. At first I was like, man, you guys, you almost seem like a weak dad to go down. And are you supporting your son's decision to get married to this woman he doesn't really know? And at first I was almost critical of them. But as I thought about it further, it made me think of God as our Father, who stays with us and loves us despite all of our bad decisions. That when we fall into sin, when we don't care about him, and when we mess up, and when we are mean or lustful or proud or whatever our personal issues are that we sin and struggle with, God's always there for us, waiting for us to come back to him as a father. And I love that picture there that we have with Samson's parents. They weren't going down to the vineyard to say, hoorah, like, awesome, we're super excited for you to marry this girl that doesn't care about your God. And here we have God using all of this, right? This wasn't new to God. It's honestly like the same thing for the world that's going on right now. It doesn't matter who's our president, Biden, Trump. It doesn't matter the Russian president, Putin, the war in Ukraine, whatever's going on in the world isn't a surprise for God, and he's going to use it all for his glory. The same with our lives. The same with Samson. Everyone is part of God's story, and he is the main character, and we are supporting actors. So in this story, what happens? So Samson goes down to a vineyard. Again, he's got to watch out. He can't be eating anything in the vineyard because that's part of his vow, right? So he goes down, and there's a lion. Now, lions I hear from going to the zoo every once in a blue moon, or the YouTube videos that I see, are not an animal I would like to deal with. I've had a few cats, and they're kind of nasty. Sometimes they like to attack, to bat you in the face or something like that, or scratch you. When I first got married, my wife had a cat, and it was pretty aggressive. Here he comes down, and this lion attacked him, right? And it's interesting because, God, it says the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. Samson is pretty much, he's given super strength by God, right? This is not something you can normally do. It's not like he struggled really hard and after a long, terrible battle, he beat it. No, he beat it really easily. It gives an illustration, one tears a young goat. It's pretty graphic, but it apparently was really easy for him to beat a lion. It was just a walk in the park for him. And so he goes down, talks with his woman. Let's continue this story. There's many twists and turns yet. So after some days, verse 8, he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion, and honey. He scraped it out into his hands and went on eating as he went. And he came to his father and mother and gave some to them, and they ate. But he did not tell them that he scraped the honey from the carcass. Wow, he was shamed because it's part of his Nazirite vow. You weren't supposed to touch anything dead, right? So he was touching the carcass of the lion. And so when he came to his parents, he was like, I got some honey, but I'm not going to tell you where I got it. And this is honestly what we do so many times with God, where we allow our shame to dictate our relationship with God, and we allow it to hamper our relationship. When we do things, when we feel things, when we think things, when we say things, how we act, when we're ashamed of what we do in this life, it can mess our relationship up with God. It's interesting how sometimes the shame actually can be more harmful than the sin. The shame will actually start to control us. And so he broke the Nazirite, one of the three parts of the Nazirite vow, by touching death. And this controlled him and gave shame to him. So let's continue on with this story. The wedding riddle now. So what happens with this story? Verse 10. His father went down to the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, for so the young men used to do. As soon as the people saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said to them, "Let me now put a riddle to you. If you can tell me what it is within 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you cannot tell me what it is, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes." And then they said to him, "Put your riddle that we may hear it." And he said, "Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet." And in 3 days they could not solve the riddle. And on the fourth day they said to Samson's wife, "Entice your husband to tell us what the riddle is, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us here to impoverish us?" And Samson's wife wept over him and said, "You only hate me. You do not love me. You have put a riddle to my people, and you have not told me what it is." And he said to her, "Behold, I have not told my father or my mother what it is." And he said to her, "And shall I tell you?" She wept before him 7 days that their feast lasted. And on the seventh day he told her, because she pressed him hard. And she told the riddle to her people. Then the men of the city said to him on the seventh day before the sun went down, "What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion?" And he said to them, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle." Wow. That's not the end of the story. Let's keep reading. "And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon and struck down 30 men of the town and took their spoil and gave the garments to those who had told the riddle. In hot anger, he went back to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man." That's a wedding. So, Again, I don't know who invited these friends, but these were not good friends. They had this riddle, and it was a bit of a pride thing, right? Again, he's off mission, so he should be saving Israel right now. He should be rounding up the young men, the warriors of Israel, and setting them free from their enemies, from their captors. But instead, he goes to a wedding and gives a riddle. So he's threatened. You have to understand the situation is terrible for his wife to be. Basically, if she doesn't try to get it from the man she's about to get married, she and her father are going to be burned by her own people, right? They're going to kill her. That's terrible. And so here, Samson reacts as he does, because he's led by lust, and he's led by anger, and he's led by pride. And then he calls his soon-to-be wife a heifer and runs away from the party in anger. Interestingly, in one night, he runs 23 miles to a nearby town of Ashkelon, another city of the Philistines, murders 30 guys, takes their clothes, comes back to the wedding party, drops it off, and then leaves the wedding. Enough, I'm done. Done with all of this. It's not a party. I'm gone. I'm out. The Spirit of the Lord used someone like that. That's interesting, right? You think like the Spirit of the Lord only uses like the really good people, right? No. God, in his holiness, beyond many times what we understand, can use many different people in many different situations. So here, God used this for something, and we're gonna see where this goes. It doesn't end. One of the amazing things when you read the scriptures and when you read more than just one chapter at a time, the different chapters coalesce, they make sense. It's a big story, right? So let's continue reading about the fox battle in Judges chapter 15. So we're going to go, like I said, it's a history lesson. Stick with me. Judges chapter 15. Let's jump into the next chapter here. After some days, at the time of the wheat harvest, Samson went to visit his wife with a young goat. And he said, "I will go in to my wife in the chamber," but her father would not allow him to go in. And her father said, "I really thought that you utterly hated her, so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please take her instead." And Samson said to them, "This time I shall be innocent in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm." So Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took torches, and he turned them tail to tail and put a torch between each pair of tails. And when he had set fire to the torches, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines and set fire to the stacked grain and the standing grain, as well as the olive orchards. And when the Philistines said, "Who had done this?" they said, "Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite," because he had taken his wife and given her to his companion. Then the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. Yeah, yikes. And Samson said to them, "If this is what you do, I swear I will be avenged on you, and after that I will quit." And he struck them hip and thigh with a great blow. And he went down and stayed in the cleft of the rock at Etam. All right. So he just had killed 30 men, given their clothes, and then, he left the party angry and empty. And again, it harkens me back to, the early story of Adam and Eve in the garden, when they took the apple or fruit from the tree. They were left empty by the promises of the serpent. And when he followed his lust and followed his pride and didn't listen to the wisdom of his parents, he was left empty and angry at the end of his wedding that didn't go right. And I feel like so many times in our life, it's so easy, not just young people, honestly. It's not just young people. It's all of us many times that no matter, where we follow our sin to, it ends up typically promising us so much in this life and then leaving us empty and angry. And that's the story of Samson. It's the story of so many people in this life. And so here, Samson, he comes back, right? So after he gets over his anger, like, sometimes people, they need to sit it out. They need to wait a little bit. He came back to his senses. He's like, all right, I'll come back to my wife, and I'll bring an animal. Hopefully, she'll like that. No flowers, nothing like that. He brought a young goat. And comes back. He wants to be with his wife. And the dad's like, actually, I gave her away to your best man. Not a great father-in-law. And then, on top of that, this will show you, the culture. He is like, but she has a younger sister. You should take her. She's actually more beautiful. That's not good, guys. That's not a good father right there. And so Samson, he just cooled down from his rage where he just killed 30 people over clothes and a riddle. And now he's getting into rage again, right? Like he's just going to lose it. And this time he's like, actually, I'm not going to be guilty. Those 30 guys that I took their clothes from probably didn't deserve it. This time they deserve it. So he's feeling like he's okay to go kill people now and do terrible things. So he somehow captures 30 foxes. I don't know if you've ever seen a fox, but foxes are actually pretty smart, pretty fast. It's going to be very hard for you to capture just one. Somehow, God probably helped him on this. He captured 300 of them. And then he set their tails on fire, let them go. They started burning down all the food. And this would be like, Walmart and Target not having any bread, any food, stuff like that. That'd be terrible. And if a region, one of the main cities of the 5 main powerful cities of the Philistines didn't have any food, that's going to, make their leaders very, very angry. So what they do, they're like, let's figure this out. Let's investigate. Who did this? And they said, Samson did it. They're like, all right, well, they found out the reason why, and then they took the dad and the wife, and they burned them with fire. Samson, just from one angry thing to another. Now he's like, now you killed my wife and my father-in-law, even though he wasn't good. Like, now I'm really, really mad. So then he goes out, and this word that they use, and he struck them hip and thigh with a great blow. The word blow actually means slaughter. So he goes out, and he just starts killing a bunch of people. In his rage, he started killing a lot of the Philistines. And then he left once again. This is something he's pretty good at. He'll rage, he'll kill a bunch of people, then he takes off, and he hides for a little bit. So he goes and hides in the rocks. Let's continue reading on in this story. Verse 9, chapter 15. Then the Philistines came up and encamped in Judah and made a raid on Lehi. And the men of Judah said, why have you come up against us? They said, we have come to bind Samson, to do to him as he did to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock at Etam and said to Samson, do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this that you have done to us? And he said to them, as they did to me, so have I done to them. And they said to him, we have come down to bind you, that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines. And Samson said to them, swear to me that you will not attack me yourselves. And they said to him, no, we will only bind you and give you into their hands. We will surely not kill you. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him from the rock. And when he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became as flax that has caught fire. And his bonds melted off his hands. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey and put his hand and took it. And with it he struck 1,000 men. And Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey I have struck down 1,000 men. He made a song about it. And as soon as he had finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone out of his hand, and the place was called Ramath Lehi. Wow. So here's the story of Samson right after, cooling down, after the father had offered him the sister, and then killed the family after the 300 foxes, destroying their harvest. He reacted once again, because they burned them. And it's interesting because it's honestly a sad story. It's full of anger, deceit, trickery. But so many times when we are led by our lusts in this life, we react to everything around us. And it's just, our life is a series of reactions. When you look back at your life, you just see that it's full of reactions. And honestly, I believe this is why when Jesus came to earth and he taught us that he was the way, the truth, and the life, it's interesting, when you see Jesus' life, it's such a contrast in that he never started any wars. And he was never really reacting to people. Like, he was always going there purposefully to show love to even those who were his enemies, those who hated him, those who beat him, those who did terrible and mean things to him. This life, this story is such a contrast. And as Jesus taught us to be the way, the truth, and the life, and taught us to follow his way, we as Christians nowadays should instead of reacting out of anger and wrath like he did, we should be reacting many times in terrible scenarios with love. Obviously, God is using this, right? And he's using all of this to start war with the enemy and defeat them. And we all know that. But it's interesting, right? Because he's just led by his desires. He's not praying. You didn't see in his story where he's like, oh, maybe I should stop and ask God what I should do in this scenario. No, he just reacted. He just did what he wanted. He just was led by his heart. He just slaughtered in reaction and then hid. So Judah comes, his own people. This is one of the first times in the scriptures where you see Jews turning on Jews, where there wasn't unity. And they come and they go to capture him, right? They had their own mission. These 3,000 Jewish men, they could have been the very army that he was training with to go defeat the Philistines in the first place. But instead, he once again disobeyed his Nazirite vow by picking up a jawbone, piece of dead animal, and God used that to put him back on mission. He took out 1,000 guys. That's pretty amazing. Once again, God did a miracle, gave him super strength to be able to take out a massive army, fought an army of guys, and took 1,000 of them out. So much so that the very last verse of the chapter says he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines for 20 years. For 20 years, they didn't mess with the Jews again because it was such a bad battle. So, I mean, honestly, armies in that day were a lot bigger than, 1,000 guys. They had armies that were over 100,000 back in that day. But I'm guessing the few survivors of that battle went back to the Philistine town and were like, don't mess with this guy. Like, all the major 5 cities of the Philistines, let's not re-raise an army and re-attack him, because what we just saw, God gave him amazing strength. We don't want to mess with that. He just mowed through us like we were nothing. So after this, it's really interesting what happened. Verse 18. It says, and he was very thirsty, and he called upon the Lord. The first time you see him talking with God at all. And he was very thirsty and called upon the Lord, and he said, you have granted me this great salvation by the hand of your servant. Now he's God's servant. And shall I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? And God split open the hollow place that is at Lehi, and water came out from it. And when he drank, his spirit returned, and he revived. And he called the name of it En-Hakor. It is at Lehi this day. He was thirsty. He was tired. I don't know if you guys do much exercise. Nowadays, honestly, I don't do that much exercise. Every once in a while, I wrestle with my kids, or my kids and I. We have a family, what we call family dance party, what we like to call it. We shut all the curtains in the house so nobody sees us dancing, and we put on speakers